Due to the graphic nature of this program, viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone. It is the Monday, February 23rd, 2026 episode of the Marco Dure Show. Thank you for tuning in to hear today's groundbreaking news right here in America and across the board, where the facts are facts and hard truths thrive. Let's begin the best of radio, informative, uncensored, unapologetic, and ready to go. Hope everyone had a blessed weekend, by the way. Let's get down to brass tacks with my first line of business, though. We've got to talk about what's taking place inside Mexico right now. The deadly violence sparked over the weekend after the military killing of the infamous cartel leader named El Mencho, better known by his real name, Nemesio Cervantes, the head of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, caused some strife over the weekend inside Mexico, as one could imagine. He was in a shootout between the Mexican special forces that were trying to capture him and his bodyguards, and then he later died from injuries en route to the hospital inside Mexico City. Well, the Mexican drug cartels easily responded to his death by declaring war on the Mexican government, that being the socialist president Claudia Sheinbaum, thus shutting down Jalisco state capital, the country's second largest city, as the engaging of running drug battles took place with the authorities in the region. So here's what's taking place right now. You see the taking out of this El Mencho, right? And this is all about vying for power now. Well, really, it is going to war with the government. This is what's taking place with the Mexican drug cartel right now. Now, violence spread very, very quickly. By the way, 20 of the 31 states, I'm told, have now seen violent clashes in the wake of course, the killing of El Mencho, the country's most wanted man, too, by the way. By the way, he was a former police officer, too, if you can imagine that. But this is the guy that they were after. Obviously, the pursuit resulted in his death, and now we're seeing chaos spread through all Mexico. You're seeing terrifying footage from all across Mexico showing torched buildings, vehicles. You're seeing panicked tourists, by the way, trying to flee the country at multiple airports. You're seeing airports in many cases shut down. In Puerto Vallarta, just in the southern portion of the state, you're seeing U.S. citizens there were issued a stay-in-place order as the narco gangs unleashed their bodily rampage throughout the resort. Can you imagine that? You're on vacation at a beautiful touristy spot. And by the way, Guadalajara, all these spots all throughout Jalisco are very, very beautiful, by the way. And again, very, very touristy. So a lot of people go to these areas. They like them. And can you imagine just waking up and seeing, pillars of smoke right nearby where your resort is, and you don't know what is going on? Now, President Sheinbaum has appealed for peace on Monday, addressing the media for the first time since El Mencho's death. She's saying that the most important thing right now is to guarantee peace and security for the entire population of all Mexico. Well, you have a crazy drug cartel that basically runs your country. They are in charge. They're well-equipped, they're intelligent, they know exactly what they're doing. They have the right type of weaponry to go after the military police, the local police. They have people within these departments that actually work for them, too, by the way. Go watch the movie Sicario. You can watch the second one, too, but really watch the first one. How the Mexican police work with the drug cartels. How they're very, very closely linked. That's probably why this El Mencho got involved with running this cartel. That's how these things work inside the country. Very, very shady stuff that takes place. By the way, great movie, too, by the way, if you want to watch that. But that gives you a real insider of how the border works, and again, how these cartels work. What happens when you take out a cartel leader? Well, now you have people now all vying for that position. You have wars between cartels. All this is taking place because of this right now. Now, they're claiming that today is a little bit more calm But again, folks, I'm seeing the pictures of this. You're seeing lots and lots of destruction, lots and lots of terror happening in the streets of Mexico today, reaching even all the way up to Baja California. You're seeing that take place, which again puts California at risk, particularly those in the border cities, parts of San Diego, Southern California. You have to understand something, too, with these drug cartels. They don't just operate on our southern border. They don't just control our southern border, which they do, by the way, but they actually operate in all 50 states here in the United States. That's a big deal. And the reason I say that to you is because the United States institutions and our intel agencies actually allowed for this attack, or at least capture, if you will, of El Mencho, and to really proceed with the arrest operations. They actually worked with the United States. So does that mean now that this cartel is going to be operating inside the United States to foment chaos here? Will they call for their factions inside the United States to attack police, attack people, set things on fire? This is why it's important to have border security, funding DHS. The Democrats don't even want that. Secure the southern border, create a border wall, create a physical barrier so you can't just walk across the line in the sand of the United States. So you can't usher in 12 to 20 million people in 4 years in the United States. All this is very important, and yet none of it gets mentioned. So we're at a point right now where we have to decide. Are we going to make it so that the Mexican drug cartels, these Jalisco New Generation cartel, can just come walk across the southern border into America? Create strife and chaos inside the United States? Is this what we want? Is this what Americans want? I mean, we got to think about our own physical safety here in the United States, our own national security. These people do not care, though. Understand that. They do not care. They only care about one thing: power and control. That's what these people care about. And this is why they're going to war with the government right now. So we need to, as a government, as a free people, we have to decide, are we going to let a foreign organization have this much control inside the United States? We know that they sell drugs, they sell weapons, they usher people in the United States, they illegally track them in the country. They even control some of them once they are in the country. This is the reality of the situation. And we should be saying to ourselves, listen, they're not going to come into our country. They're not going to be selling drugs. They're not going to use Honduran illegals in various parts of the country to sell their drugs on the streets. Particularly drugs like fentanyl, heroin, cocaine. And I think it's time for us to make a stand against that. Now, I know before President Trump has talked about going to war with the drug cartels on his own, which I said was ridiculous. It's still a foreign country. If Mexico would like us to help mitigate this threat, that would be something different. But we have to ask ourselves the question now. Are we at war with the Mexican drug cartels? And it seems like it could very well lead to something like that. Because again, they're going to figure out that we helped aid and abet the military to go after them. And of course, figure out where this guy was, and now he's dead. So that means they are going to war. And God knows how long this is going to take place. Mexico's Secretary of National Defense, by the way, thanked the United States for its help in the operation that killed Mencho. So this is a big problem for us. And we should be on all alert on our southern border. So again, if you're in California, you're in Southern California, you're in Texas on the border, all these different parts, there is a real risk that something could very well happen. Retaliation, revenge. That's what we're seeing right now in the streets of Mexico. And I can only hope that at least this stops before it gets any worse. But I don't believe that is going to happen right now. I don't think you could take out a drug kingpin like that, murdering him, and then expect everything just to go back to normal overnight. I don't think that's going to happen. So we should be on high alert. We should have forces on the southern border to stop this threat. And we need to secure our southern border moving forward. We cannot allow this to happen at all. You cannot let a murderous cartel gang operate inside the United States. And we know that, obviously, they control a lot of the drug flow and the distribution here in the United States, which kills many Americans every single year. And, of course, they control the gang violence and what have you. Those operations, it's all very, very closely related. Let's end this. Why don't we do that? Why doesn't President Trump be a hero and end that instead of going to war with Iran? Which, again, it makes absolutely no sense to me. Which brings me to my next point. We have to talk about President Trump and his legacy. Well, why do I say that to you? Well, he's got a State of the Union taking place tomorrow evening. He could obviously sign a deal with the Iranian government and their nuclear program, or he can go to an all-out war with them and risk the consequences for what could possibly take place, a greater regional war, collapsing the world economies by this war in the Middle East. He has two roads to go on. And every road that it looks like to me is that he's choosing to go on the road that he wants to go to war with them, based on his actions. Again, I'm looking at what his actions are, not what he's saying. At the start of the year, he said he wanted peace. Now we're talking about going to war without the approval of Congress with Iran. This is where we are now as a country. Now, Trump has said that he would prefer a strict agreement that stops Tehran from being able to develop nuclear weapons. But here's the thing. He had this opportunity last June. The Iranians were coming together. They were going to give him what he wanted. Everyone was very happy about this. And then right at the end of it, right when this was going to happen, he allows Israel to go in and start bombing Tehran, killing nuclear scientists, killing negotiators, killing civilians, killing members of the IRGC. So we've got so many issues with this. Iran's not going to trust us now after this. Now they're on high alert. And by the way, they're stronger than they were last June. Let's just make that very, very clear, too. This is not going to be Venezuela. This is not going to just be a simple in and out. If we attack them, we risk, of course, destroying the oil sectors all throughout the world, disrupt that supply chain. We're talking about global economies being crushed that are already in recession right now. We risk our military bases all throughout the Middle East to be hit, our troops to be killed, and we think this is going to be just something that's totally fine. It's not going to be totally fine, especially when Yemen, Iraq, Syria can get involved in this. Israel, of course, will come to our aid and our side, and it'll be an all-out greater war for the region. But here's the problem, too. You also have the risk of Russia, China, and even Pakistan, possibly even Turkey. I don't know if Turkey would get in, but they could, for example, because they know probably they're next on this chopping block of countries to be taken out by the U.S. But this is what's taking place right now. This is happening because Benjamin Netanyahu wants Trump to go into Iran and take out the supreme leader, and this idea of a decapitation strike, regime change. This is what they're talking about. It's not about the nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons are the facade. The ballistic missiles are a facade. You know why? Because they're not using them unless they have to. So we could talk about threats and what have you. We know they have a fatwa, which again is a dictate by the supreme leader, that they're not going to build nuclear weapons. They've said this time and time again. They're not building a nuclear weapon. They have no desire to build a nuclear weapon. It's against their religion to build a nuclear weapon. But yet, time and time again, we hear the same old propaganda. What is that propaganda? Well, it comes out of people like Netanyahu. Judge Napolitano had this on his show today, and I said, this is brilliant enough to play on my show. This goes back to 1996 to 2025, all these clips of Netanyahu saying the exact same thing. A broken record, if you will. Let's take a listen.
Deadline for attaining this goal is getting extremely close. And Iran, by the way, is also outpacing Iraq in the development of ballistic missile systems that they hope will reach the eastern seaboard of the United States within 15 years. By next spring, at most, by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks, before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb. The foremost sponsor of global terrorism could be weeks away from having enough enriched uranium for an entire arsenal of nuclear weapons. That would place a militant Islamic terror regime weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
I find this very interesting. Obviously, he's saying the exact same thing for the last 30 years. And by the way, it's been in the press since 1984. I found an article dating back to 1984, if you can believe that, saying the exact same thing. Iran is weeks away from getting a nuclear weapon and what a threat to the world it would be. Listen, I don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon more than anybody else. I want arms control with countries like the United States and Russia and China. That we're not going to just foment these developmental processes to build these weapons and possibly even use them. I would like to see denuclearization. I'm not saying we have to give up our weapons, but the idea that we're going to continue to foment, create more lethal weapons is not something beneficial to anybody. And yet every step of the way, President Trump has gotten out of these arms treaties. And now we're talking about proliferation of them. We have nothing holding us back from producing whatever the hell we want, however much we want. That puts the world at a greater risk, and that causes other countries, Russia, China, to really invest in, develop more nuclear weapons themselves. Could they possibly even share that technology with countries like Iran? Of course they can. Of course they can. So we've got to look at this as critical thinkers and say to ourselves, okay, is this threat with Iran, of which they can use their hypersonic missiles to sink our aircraft carriers inside the Mediterranean or the Arabian Sea, worthwhile? Is this beneficial to we, the United States, that should be focused on America? America first, domestic policies, our own national security? Look what's taking place in Mexico now. That could obviously sweep into the United States. We have to think about these things. And we're focused on a country, 6,000 miles away from us? That poses absolutely no national security risk to the United States. There's no intelligence of any imminent danger or threat in the United States coming from Iran. And one of the things that Netanyahu said, he said the number one state sponsor of terrorism. We hear this too, by the way, all throughout the Western media too. I've heard this time and time again. But Iran being the number one state sponsor of terrorism. So terrorism, as we all know, is any type of attacks or violence on civilians for the purposes of political retribution. Okay, so they're using, and again, fear, violence, chaos for political means. That's what terrorism is. The CIA's own data shows since 1990, over 80%, okay, in the last 36 years, 80% of all the global terrorist attacks that have been recorded by our CIA have been orchestrated by Sunni Muslims. Well, folks, let me tell you something. The Iranians are Shia Muslims. They are opposed to what Sunni Muslims do. Iran doesn't support them. They don't finance them. They don't work with them. They don't like them. They haven't given them one iota of money. And yet, for some reason, we're saying that Iran is the number one state sponsor of terrorism. No, they're not. They're not even close. It's these factions, the Taliban, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. That party that the now current president of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, is a part of, or was a part of, I guess I will say. It was a break-off of Al-Qaeda. But these are the people on the top 10 most wanted list. The president of Syria was on that list. He had a bounty on his head for $10 million. He's killed Americans. And when you look at what the Shia Muslims have done, since 2000 I've looked at this. Larry Johnson said this on the Judge's show today. Again, brilliant analysis too, by the way. But it's been a major, I think it was maybe 670 people in that 26-year time frame have been killed by any type of attacks from Shia Muslims. I mean, so it's a totally, so it'll be Hezbollah, Hamas, and what have you. So it's a total, again, it's horrible, 670 people have died. But it's a drop in the bucket compared to what these other factions have done. Yet we consider, and we keep saying that Iran is the number one sponsor of global terrorism. They're not. Not even close. Not even close to that. And I think it's funny, too. We have Netanyahu saying this to us when he is responsible himself in just over 2 years of 75,000 at least. It's probably much higher than that. But 75,000 Palestinians killed. Over 80% of that figure have had nothing to do with what took place on October 7th. Nothing at all. Yet in the media, you hear time and time again, every Palestinian's a terrorist, they're animals, they're barbarians. If we don't kill them, they're going to kill us. If we don't kill their children, they're going to grow up and become terrorists. This whole rhetoric is sickening. And don't give me the self-defense business. You know, it's ridiculous. This goes well beyond self-defense. Indiscriminately killing people. And there's footage of it too, by the way. There's plenty of it out there if you go to look for it. Kids getting shot. People being hit by drone strikes. People being killed. 20 to 30 every single day inside Gaza. That's the estimate. During a ceasefire being killed right now. This is who you're listening to? This is a man you're putting on a board of peace? Really? This is a man you invite to the White House time and time again? I mean, you could hide behind the self-defense. That's fine, but it's really meaningless at this point. Self-defense was what took place that day. That is self-defense, deterring what takes place inside your country. This is willfully and indiscriminately attacking people in a territory which you should not be in. Violates UN Charter Article 242 to go into this territory of Gaza, even the West Bank, and again, control the area, attack the people in these areas. Again, the West Bank is a mess too, by the way. Going into Lebanon, going into Syria, going into Iraq. Airstrikes. He's in a 7-front war, folks. And we're talking about Iran being the number one state sponsor of terrorism in the region? I don't think so. I don't think so. And again, I condemn what took place on October 7th, absolutely, 100%, but we have to look at the response to that. And that was that they have complete carte blanche to go in and just do whatever the hell they want inside Gaza. Shut off the power, starve people, kill people, under the guise of, well, we bombed this building because, Hamas is under there. They're under the building. Okay. Everyone's under every building? Really? And yet you're killing all these other people indiscriminately that have nothing to do with it? Again, it really is unbelievable. But look at this. Trump laid out the set of demands for Tehran. No more nuclear enrichment. Well, again, they should have some level of nuclear enrichment for civilian, medical purposes. Strict limits on its ballistic missiles. And an end to support for regional proxy militias such as Hamas and Hezbollah. So in other words, they don't want them to have any allies in the region. This is what they're saying. They don't want them to have any type of, again, I don't know what strict limitations means for the ballistic missiles. But we know they have hypersonic missiles now. They're very advanced in their drone capacity as well. And they are a threat to Israel. That's what this all comes down to. They know there's no nuclear weapons, but this is what they want. If he sticks with the nuclear proportion of this and he allows them some enrichment, which before he would let them have, I believe it was 3.5%. If he does something along those lines, then he might get a deal out of them if this is what he really wants. But everything he's doing in his actions shows me that he wants war with this. And everyone that I've been listening to has been saying and reading from has been saying, we are going to go to war with Iran. It is going to happen. I just believe it was going to happen after the State of the Union. And why would he want to explain that during the State of the Union? So I think it's going to happen probably very, very soon. Probably before this, he said before last week, 10-day deadline is what he was giving them. 10 days till the next round of negotiations. I think it's going to happen in that span because what did he do last time? He was supposed to meet with them on a Sunday. That Friday, Israel attacked them. So he was catching them off guard. But right now, the Iranians have picked up on this. They realize we're ready for anything. We're ready right now. Once we see something hit our soil or threaten our soil, we are in a war with you. And it's not going to be, we're going to bomb this empty building, you bomb this empty building, we call it quits. This is an all-out war. Our military bases are going to be hit. Our troops in that region, if they're in those facilities, would be hit. Oil fields, oil refineries, Israel, everything is going to be on the table for Iran to strike. Should we go ahead and do this? They are threatening a significant retaliation, and they have the means to do it. And by the way, vowing even to sink American warships, which would be very devastating as well. Cutting off the Strait of Hormuz, as I told you before, cutting off 20 to 25% of the global oil trade is going to be very devastating for the global economies. Does Trump really want this? This is Trump's legacy right here. This is all set on his legacy. So he either decides, am I going to be a leader and stand up for what's right and just hash out a deal on nuclear with them, or am I going to go to war with them for Netanyahu and Israel's purposes? That's what he's facing right now. So he's facing the donor class. He's facing the arch-Zionist and his administration that are pushing him into this war. The people like Lindsey Graham, for example, and what have you, that continue to go out and say how he's going to be like FDR, he's going to be like Reagan. And again, I know his voice is much girlier than that, but yeah, that's what he's saying. But this is the reality. He's listening to these schmucks who have really no real concern other than what Israel wants. This is true, and this is why we're seeing this. It's not going to be an in and out like what we saw with Maduro and Venezuela. It's completely, totally different country. Totally, well, similar terrain, really. It's similar mountainous areas too, tough to get into, just like in Venezuela. But again, we haven't really taken over Venezuela. That was just a decapitation strike. You're not going to just get a decapitation strike and an end of the government in Iran. It's just not going to work that way. So only time will tell, folks, when this happens. But again, as I told you before, he does these on the weekend, doesn't he? This is usually his time to strike. So I think after the State of the Union, I think he will make some sort of plea during that speech as why we need to go in and save Iran for national security. Look what we're doing on the border. Again, fine. What he's doing on the border is fine. We don't want a flow of illegals coming in this country. He shut that off. Great. Let's build that border wall. Let's make sure we take out the threat of the drug cartels in the United States. And let's get out of this idea that we're going to defeat Iran in one evening. Because that's simply not going to be happening. Not at all. Not even close. By the way, I want to talk to you about something that most people are not discussing right now before we move on to the economy. This is out of the Daily Express. It says that World War III tensions now spike as Russia claims British trace in spy chief assassination attempt. Look at this. Look at this. Could the British people be really this stupid to elect Keir Starmer? That's what I want to know. Could they really be that dumb to elect this idiot and to allow MI6 to go ahead and do this? Get a load of this. It says Britain now has been accused by Moscow of involvement in an assassination attempt in one of Vladimir Putin's top military intelligence figures. That'd be Lieutenant General Vladimir Alexeyev, the deputy chief of Russia's GRU spy agency. This is part of the Russia military intelligence. And he was shot inside a residential building on February 6th, suffering severe injuries, taken to a hospital, but is expected to recover. So it was a failed attempt. Now, Russia's counterintelligence head, Alexander Bortnikov, today alleged that there was a British trace connected to this attack, which he had claimed had been carried out by Ukrainian intelligence. So what we're seeing here in this is we're seeing other factions behind this. He said, we understand that the organizers were the Ukrainian special services, but behind them stand third countries. He said, we've spoken about this before, that Ukrainian special services operate under the supervision or with the supervision of Western intelligence. We see a British trace above all here, is what he's saying. Thus, put forth a greater investigation behind this, figuring out what happened. We saw this take place with the attempted assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin. They got some of the drones that had been used, that hadn't officially blown up. They went through and they looked at the information inside of these drones. They figured out it was coming out of Germany, but they found that it was programmed by the United States. And of course, they then gave it to the Ukrainians to use, obviously. So we're seeing so many other factions behind all this. But this is no good, folks. This is no good for peace. This is no good for anything. To try to take out members of the Russian government, I mean, especially the military intelligence, it's not going to be something that's positive moving forward. Now, there have been also claims that Alexeyev has been seen as kind of an embarrassment for the Russian government. Whatever. I could care less. He was involved in some attempted poisoning of some double agents working with Great Britain years ago, back in 2018, failed on it. Okay, fine, whatever. But now we're in a war. And Russia is very cognizant of what the West is doing, including the UK. Now, what they found out, too, was that the Russian authorities previously detained 2 suspects in this now. One named Korba, the other one named Vasin, accusing them of working for Ukraine's SBU security service. The third suspect reportedly worked and lived in the same building where the shooting took place, is also have been now believed to have escaped to Ukraine. And Korba and Vasin have now fully admitted their guilt to what took place. So this is a terrible situation on many fronts. This is a time where we should be working for peace. Not assassination attempts, not coup attempts like this, taking out people inside the intelligence, but working for peace. And we're not seeing that right now. So Putin is very much aware of what's taking place. He understands this. And do you think that the world understands this too, folks? Do you think that Putin doesn't talk to Xi or Pezeshkian or any of the other members of BRICS? Do you think they just don't talk about these things or share these things? Just because it's not on the Western media? They know exactly what's going on. So now we have the UK trying to have their hand in taking out a member of the Russian intelligence. Unbelievable. Again, this is no good for peace. This is no good for peace moving forward between the two countries. And this war is going to go on with no end in sight. How do you send Witkoff and Kushner, who are going to talk about money and enriching themselves instead of the issue at hand, which is a mutual security cooperation agreement between Russia and the West? How do you get that now? How do you get that with these threats of assassination between the two countries? Well, you don't. And that's the biggest problem we have with all this. All right, let's move on to this article I have in Reuters talking about the tariff situation that we find ourselves in now. We talked about this on Friday's show. So we know now by now, of course, that the Supreme Court has let President Trump know that his reciprocal tariffs were not justified, which again I agree with. I agree with their decision, despite some conservative members on the court suggesting that there were no grounds to remove this. But now Trump's subsequent move now is to impose now a temporary 15% global tariff on every single country. So now he's moving on to another step to try to keep these tariffs as best he can. And there are winners and losers in this now. And I think these tariffs will have to stick for at least a little bit of time. I think they'll be temporary because I think they'll be shot down as well. But what's interesting about this is that China and Brazil, 2 BRICS members, by the way, have a new baseline of 50%. This is the new baseline for them, which again is substantially lower than the tariffs that they've usually been dealing with. So I look at these things and say to myself, well, he's trying to do what he can to put tariffs on everybody now. That seems to be what he's doing. But for a couple of dozen of countries now, they've sought to avoid the impact of these reciprocal tariffs now, trying to stop them, trying to get them reduced, and trying to create deals with the United States. That was what we said the whole point of this was. But now you've got Britain and the European Union, Japan among them now do these deals stick? Do they go away? Because now we're paying more in these tariffs now than what we previously negotiated on. So, classic Trump, obviously, he says one thing and now he's doing a complete 180 on all this. Not a complete shock on this. What he's doing now, though, let me explain this to you. He's trying to go to a new agreement right now, and it's under this new trade deal from 1970, and in it is a section called 122, and that allows the President of the United States to issue these temporary tariffs for up to 150 days, capping them off at 15% without congressional approval, so he doesn't need to go through Congress still. And it could be every country. It could be some select group of countries they could target. In this case, it was all of them. President Trump put it on all global trade. So here's the part that's tricky, though, in this section of 122. Okay? President Trump has a big problem with this, and here's what it needs to be justified. You have to have a large and serious U.S. balance of payment deficit. Now, what does that mean? So, again, a trade deficit or major deficit spending is not enough reason for this to be justified. So, in order for this to meet that standard, the country would have to have something of the following. This is what meets the definition of a U.S. balance of payment deficit. You would need, for example, foreign exchange reserves are collapsing in our central bank. Is either low on the reserves, so think dollars, think gold, think silver, think foreign currencies that we would use to pay for imports or to stabilize the strength of our dollar. So clearly, that's not happening right now. So that's one thing. Another would be the currency is rapidly losing its value. So, for example, if this were happening, we would see some indicators like a sharp depreciation, capital flights, emergency interest tariff hikes we would see right now from the Federal Reserve. We might see things like foreign nations dumping the dollar from their central banks, things of that nature. But again, none of that is happening right now because we're not in this type of fiscal situation. We might see, for example, countries unable to finance foreign obligation. So, for example, we might have risking something like defaults on our trade balances. We might see a severe liquidity problem, solvency problem. We're also not seeing that. What else might we see? Okay, we might see the trade imbalance is so severe that it collapses or destabilizes the entire U.S. financial sector. So, for example, sustaining deficits, we might have rapid reserve depletion right now. We might be unable to borrow or roll over our debt from another foreign country. None of this is happening. So I think what President Trump is thinking, well, hey, I've got 150 days now, and I'll slap on this 15% global tariff, and it will help just initiate us to take in more money. I think that's all it is. I really think that's all this is. I'm not seeing anything in there, in this legislation, that would prove that we're in some sort of issue where we have this problem with our payments. I don't see that happening. I don't see it happening at all. And just so we're clear on this, just so we understand this, in 1971, just for the context of this, President Nixon had a real financial crisis at his hands. We saw gold reserves that were plummeting in the United States. We saw foreign treasuries were redeeming U.S. dollars for gold. We saw that the dollar was under attack by the global markets, and again, therefore, risked being unable to meet its obligations. This is what was taking place in 1971. So this was a true, real economic crisis at hand, and President Nixon responded with a 10% global tariff on all imports. So that's why that took place, and that's what gave him the ability to kind of usher this in much more quickly. But everything we hear from the White House, here's the problem. Everything we're hearing from the White House is how great the economy is. How we're bringing in $175 billion in the tariff revenue. In fact, the Trump administration has bragged that inflation has cooled. We see real wages are rising. We see GDP growth has accelerated. Prescription drugs, gas prices at the pump, they're all falling. And we have trillions of dollars of investments coming into the United States. So the economy is good. Fine, great. So then how can you justify using this statute intended for an economic crisis. Is he going to tell us during the State of the Union speech tomorrow that we're in an economic crisis? Let's hope not. I don't think he would anyways. But we also have a spokesperson recently just came out and said, the best is yet to come. That means everything is good. It's only going to get better from here. Well, I hope so. We've been waiting for this. But again, I don't know how he's going to do this. I don't know how he's going to sell this to the courts again or to Congress as to why he's doing this. But here's the best part about this. Here's the best part about this bill. Congress has no mandate to investigate, to hold any hearings, to hold President Trump accountable, which allows the president to act immediately still. So in other words, Congress can't go and meet right now and say, well, the president is doing this illegally. Can't happen that way. And again, I see all the dummies on the right even, I guess, love 15% taxes on imported goods that they buy. I don't understand that for the life of me. We want things to become more affordable. Do they not understand that this 15% tariff of all imports is going to be allowing the consumer price index to rise? Because you're going to have to be paying for that difference now. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It really is. And what's even more funny, what's even the best part about all this, they're talking about now refunding some of these companies for the money that they had to pay to bring this in. The middlemen, of course, too, that they had to pay. So the companies are going to get a check back from the government. Meanwhile, you still paid that difference of whatever it was when you bought the product at the retail store or bought it online or wherever it may be. So in the end, you lost out on the money, and these companies might get some money back after even increasing their prices to meet the demands from the tariff. Unbelievable, absolutely ridiculous. I think the real losers in this are the American people paying this higher percentage every time they go to the store. That's what it really comes down to. By the way, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, told Maria Bartiromo on Sunday Morning Futures yesterday that the tariff revenues will not stop, framing the ruling as procedural rather than authoritative. Obviously, he's referring to using this Section 122. Framing the ruling as procedural, as I said, he said that the administration still has multiple statutory authorities to address trade imbalances. Notice what he said there, trade imbalances. That means he's referring to a trade deficit. That has to do with, of course, us bringing in more imports from a country, like China, for example, then, of course, we export to them. That's on us. That has nothing to do with China. Obviously, we want those goods, otherwise we wouldn't have them come into the country. But then he finishes by saying, and national security threats. What is he talking about there? Well, I think he's talking about things such as China is giving synthetic chemicals to Mexico, to these drug cartels, the lunatics I talked about earlier in the show, to bring in fentanyl, to distribute it to people throughout the country. And we're going to use tariffs now to, I guess, stop this? I don't understand that part. Because last time I checked, China and Mexico are number 1 and number 2 as far as who brings in the most imports into the country. So their trade revenues have gone up as a result of this. So it's amazing. Again, we're not seeing this reduction as a result of these tariffs. If we were, China wouldn't have a record surplus in 2025 with us if the tariffs were working to do that. And by the way, China actually decreased imports into the United States, yet still had a record surplus in 2025. Go ask Scott Bessent about that. Let's see him explain that. It's unbelievable. It really is. But he said the objective hasn't changed. Reduce trade deficits, which we're not doing with the tariffs. Protect domestic industry, which, again, I don't know how you're doing that if they're paying more. And pressure the foreign governments that have been gaming the system. How are they gaming the system, Scott? How are they gaming the system? We're not producing the product. They bring it into the United States. I go to the store and I buy the product. What's the problem? How are they gaming the system? How are they ripping us off, as you say? Now, they're saying they're gaming the system because their trade surpluses, is what's taking place, is happening. So they say, well, look, China's got a, $350 billion surplus on us. They're ripping us off. They're ripping off the consumer. No, they're not. They're bringing in the product because we're not making it here in the United States. That's the problem. So we want the product, so we buy it from them. That's what trade is. That's what a trade deal is. So, I mean, I'd have to assume Scott Bessent knows this. I can't imagine he'd be this stupid. He doesn't sound like a stupid guy at all. But why do we keep saying that they're gaming the system? We need to reduce the trade. Okay, fine. Bring in more manufacturing, which is what I've been saying since I started this show last June. I've been shouting it every single week. I know I've been saying that. I say it a lot. That's how you build a middle class. That's how you stop, obviously, all these imports from coming in if you're worried about a trade deficit. Trade deficits we've had for the better part of the last 90 years with various countries. That's how you solve that. You bring the product to the United States, you cultivate it here, and you export more than you import. That's how you reduce trade deficits. That's how you create surpluses, by the way. But thanks to Billy Clinton in the mid-1990s, NAFTA, among other trade deals, outsourced the manufacturing out of the country. And he told you it was going to be a great thing. And everyone bought it up because the economy was doing okay. How's the economy doing today, folks? Not as good. Not as good. In fact, much, much worse. That's how you solve the problem. That's what he should be working for, not working on stupid tariffs that allow the government to collect more money and you pay more. So the government takes in even more money. Isn't that nice? Well, I don't think so. And by the way, President Trump's up against a lot for this State of the Union. He's got to be on his A game for many different reasons. One of them, and this is in the Hill. This is a big blow to President Trump, by the way. It says here that 60% of respondents in this latest Washington Post, ABC News Ipsos poll, but they tend to be more left-leaning, of course. I take this with a grain of salt. I do. But they strongly disapprove or somewhat disapprove of the way President Trump is handling his job as president. That's just not on one different sector. This is across the board. They're being asked if they approve of President Trump and how he's conducting his position as president. 60% of people are saying, no, we don't like what he's doing. We disapprove of what he's doing. Those numbers are not good. And by the way, he's got to be aware of this too, by the way. And he's got to be able to respond to this. Some 39% in the same exact poll said they either strongly approve or approve somewhat when it comes to President Trump's job as president. 1% of the respondents did not even respond to the question. So we've got to understand what's going on here. We're facing this rocky political terrain in the last few months, dealing with several different issues, including concerns about affordability, our economy. We're talking about things like handling the Jeffrey Epstein files. President Trump runs on this, says we're going to release this to the public. We're going to be the most transparent presidency in America. We're reminded all the time by White House spokes idiots all the time about all this. And yet, we don't get the information out. Or it's redacted. Or nobody gets convicted. Or we're told it's a Democratic hoax. Okay, then why did you run on that? You ran on a Democratic hoax? I mean, this is no good. We need to see progress, right? We see some progress in various things. We see gas prices down. I'm sure he'll tell us about this. But we need to see some progress across the board. When you see inflation is still 3% higher than it was in 2024, and you say, well, at least it wasn't 9% 1 year of the Biden administration, we still need to bring the prices down. And the way you do that is by making production much cheaper. That's how you do these things. You know, you could tell us all day long that we're going to get money back in, IRS returns from the government, maybe, see $1,000 more. Okay. But you're still paying, on average, a lot more every single year. That's the problem. They said last year was $1,000 more as a result of the amount of money we spend for these tariffs. You were spending $1,000 more throughout the year because of these tariff prices. That's a lot of money in some cases. Maybe that's some people, but in many cases, that's a lot of money to spend. They're estimating this year is going to be $1,300. So by you telling us, hey, you're going to get a stimulus check from these tariffs, and then all of a sudden that goes away, and then you're told, hey, you might get some more money back from your IRS returns, money that's already yours. Doesn't seem to work out, does it, folks? It kind of whitewashes the whole effect of it all. Listen, for Trump's speech tomorrow, here's what I think he needs to do. Anywhere that he's got some sort of progress, he needs to hone in on that. He needs to talk about his strengths as president, what's changed for the positive, something tangible to the American people so they can see it. Hopefully they can feel it. So yes, he needs to show strength, of course, and he usually does. He knows how to present himself. He never struggles with that, but it needs to be real. It can't be this nonsense. Because if all he's going to talk about is investment figures, if he's going to talk about stock market highs, again, most people aren't affected by that. And by the way, we haven't seen any of that growth coming in from any of these so-called investments. That's another big problem. Most people don't give a damn if the Dow is at a record high. They just don't. Talk about how you're going to increase wages, how you're going to bring down the cost to where it was 5-6 years ago. Talk about how you're going to make production cheaper, how you're going to make America a much more viable place for manufacturing or for job opportunities, for particularly Gen Zers who are leaving you in droves. That's what you should be focusing on. But again, showing us everything and telling us nothing is not going to be something good. I don't think it's going to work out well for him. And then, you got to talk about how you're creating, how are you going to convince people that MAGA is still alive? That's what I want to know. How are you going to do that? We're seeing early voting in Texas now with Democrats showing up to the polls in higher droves in Texas in the midterm primaries. Right now, happening right now. That's what's taking place. In fact, you're seeing, from what I can tell, the total early ballot cast now, Democratic primaries, 483,000 voters to Republicans, 446,000. Inside Texas, a red state, a red stronghold. So that means you're seeing some roughly 37,000 more Democrats voting right now inside Texas than Republicans. A state we're supposed to lead in. And by the way, they're doing much, much better. Their early voting is up by 211,000 votes in the same time period since in the 2022 election. Early voting for Republicans is only up 6,000 in that same time frame. So we've got a lot of things going on here. There's lots of things happening inside Texas, but if you can't invigorate people to go out and vote, and I'm not saying it's done for the Republicans, but if people are this ardent to go out and increase by that big a number from just 4 years ago, that's a big problem. That's a major, major problem. I'm not saying it's the end. I'm not saying things can't change. What I'm saying is, though, you've got to show improvement. You've got to show a reason to vote for the Republican Party. And that's on President Trump. And again, I'm interested to see what he's going to say tomorrow. Because he needs to. He needs to be strong in his approach as to what is going on in this country. 100%. So we'll cover that more on Wednesday to see what he says tomorrow evening. We'll see what he says, what his strengths, what his weaknesses are. Where is the country going to go under his leadership if you vote for Republicans? That's what he's got to hone in on. Oh, by the way, though, we are seeing some positive things taking place. This is out of the Gateway Pundit. 2 Republicans now surge to the top of the California governor's race. And, of course, the Democrats are now in fear because of the stupid jungle primaries that Arnold Schwarzenegger put in place. And now they're saying it could be 2 Republicans now to be the top vote getters inside the general election. And that would be devastating for Democrats if that were to take place. I don't think that is going to take place. I really don't. I know a lot of Republicans are very happy. I believe Chad Bianco is up at 20% right now. And then Steve Hilton, the other Republican, the other top-performing Republican, is at something like 12 or so. Again, both are ahead of any other Democrat in the race. They're saying that the latest polls, though, and again, I don't think it's changing this much, but The latest poll numbers show why Democrats are sounding these alarms. Let me see who did this poll, though. Doesn't say. Well, that's not good. I'd like to know. Oh, I'm sorry. Emerson College poll. There we go. Steve Hilton is at, well, I guess Steve Hilton outpaced him, 17%. Chad Bianco, 14%. Eric Swalwell, the dunce, who shouldn't be in this race, is at 14%. Katie Porter, very unpopular, 10%. Tom Steyer, who nobody knows anything about, a billionaire from Silicon Valley, is at 9%. These are the top performers. So what they're arguing, what people are arguing, by the way, it's very early in this race. What they're arguing is that this is why Dems are getting nervous. 2 Republicans are leading the race. But here's what's going to happen. The chair of the Democratic Party is going to have probably the people that are not performing well, the lower numbers to drop out, to have the top 2 Democrats probably vie it out to each other. And in that case, you'll see a Democrat coming first, obviously, because obviously it makes up the bulk of the voters. And then obviously the leading Republican will be in second place. That's usually how it goes in California. So that's what's probably going to happen. I do believe, I can't imagine they would have everybody stay in the race. That would be stupid. If they do stay in the race, you will see something like that. I don't think that's going to happen, though. I don't think that's going to happen. By the way, once somebody drops out, that 9-10% will go somewhere else, and probably to the leading candidate. Can you imagine, though, if Eric Swalwell is the leading Democrat for California? I mean, you talk about committing suicide as a state. Electing Eric Swalwell will be exactly that. But you've never seen that usually in California. Usually you see the top 2 are the Republican and the Democrat. And the Democrat. That's the way it usually works in these races. So it is interesting to see this taking place. But again, I don't think it's going to hold up for much, much longer. The Democrat Party will get its people in order. They'll say, this person needs to drop out, this person needs to drop out. And that's what you'll see. If it is evenly spaced out like that, then you might see that scenario, but I don't think it's going to be playing out like that. I really don't. But it is nice to see that 2 Republicans are leading the state that desperately needs some sort of change in Sacramento. All right, folks, one more article before we end today's show. Let me talk to you about what's taking place in The Guardian. And a lot of people are angry about the future of MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. They're very mad that Trump's FDA now is retreating from a plan to ban artificial colors in the foods, which we're very happy about as far as an achievement in making America a much healthier place. Here's what happened, though. In a further retreat from its pledge to ban artificial dyes from food, Donald Trump's FDA now has announced that it would loosen labeling requirements to allow companies to state no artificial colors, even though products may contain some dangerous substances, such as things like titanium dioxide. Now, what is titanium dioxide? Why is it bad to ingest something like this? Well, it's very bad because it causes things like DNA damage, it causes inflammation, respiratory illnesses and issues, potential long-term side effects like cancers, for example. Something you don't want to have in your body. And yet, for some reason, it's okay to put this inside your food supply. Usually these things are in cereals, colors, candies, things like that. They use it as a fake dye. That's what it comes down to. So the FDA agreed to what most critics label as a kind of handshake with the big food companies, right? The big business, the big ags, to stop the food dyes. Now, Kennedy framed it as an understanding, but some candy makers, for example, are still refusing to fully stop using these artificial dyes. The latest decision around labeling is going to cause confusion and, of course, to allow some companies to mislead folks. Well, they're the masters of this. They're always the masters of this. So they're going to mislead folks about the colors and, of course, where they come from. They talk about moving away from, for example, petroleum-based synthetic colors and adopting safer, naturally derived alternatives. So, for example, they want to use things like, beet juice, for example. Things like that, right? To make the colors, obviously, look real. That's what they're talking about. Moving away from these things. But obviously these companies, are not going to move into the beet juice, the beet powder, the butterfly pea flour. They're not going to move to that because it's going to be more against their cost initiative. They want to be more cost efficient. That's why they go into the fake colors. It's just cheaper for them versus using a real actual product, as you would see, for example, inside Europe. That's what's taking place right now inside America. So instead of making America more healthy again, which is what we should be going towards, we want to see those medical prices begin to drop. That's what you should be working on. That would be a worthwhile thing to do. But we're not seeing that because these companies, they would rather have the cheaper route. And that's why you see the fake dyes, right? The preservatives, because they don't want to, give either the livestock or the proper feed or the proper environment. It's just cheaper. It's more cost effective to give cattle grains instead of giving it grass because it fattens it up much, much quicker. That's why they do these things. And again, that's why they put the food dyes in. That's why they do all these things. And instead of making America healthy again, it makes America much, much sicker. That's why you see cancer rates spike. You see all these other ailments that take place all throughout America because of this. And we should be saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to move away from this. This is why we elected you. We shouldn't even have these things in our food supply that are carcinogens, that make people sick. It's unbelievable. Folks, thank you for being here today. I appreciate you so much. Share the show with others. Have a great rest of the day. I'll see you back here tomorrow for more groundbreaking news on the next Marco Dre Show. Until then, be good. Stay busy. God bless.